It's episode 200. That's C8 in hex. Welcome to the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up for the week of 27 March 2022. We've got Zlib, Spring4shell, Apple, Honda, Rockwell, and National Backup Day. All this and show wrap-ups on the Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Monitoring and maintaining compliance is a never-ending struggle with a high price of failure. FIREMON helps customers meet complex and varying compliance requirements. FIREMON has fully customizable reporting, analytics, assessments, and dashboards to meet the compliance needs of any organization. With FIREMON, compliance reports take a tenth of the time, and real-time continuous compliance eliminates the anxiety and headaches of audit preparation. Improve security outcomes by improving security operations with FIREMON. Visit securityweekly.com/FIREMON to learn more.
All right, I'm Doug White from Roger Williams University, and this is the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up Show, episode 200. Really, that's a lot of episodes. It's April Fool's Day here at Security Weekly, and every year on April 1st, the trees are filled with underwear and the toilets explode. That is a quote. All right, this week on Application Security Weekly number 190, John and Mike had Herschel Parikh, the CEO and co-founder of Tromso, on the show. The segment was about the future of AppSec. This has been a common topic down for a long time about how developers are probably never going to adopt security measures really because, the minute you come to me as a developer and you say we need to add security into this mix, and my problem is I've got to get this code developed by Friday, my developer hat saying just do it, and, my security hat is saying no, don't do that. And, as long as this stuff's adding to the development time and, appearing to be a giant headache, they're not going to do it. So they did talk in this segment about how to make this an easier process and how you can make it developer-first oriented. So it's kind of interesting segment. That's a popular topic. In the second segment, they had the AppSec news. On Business Security Weekly number 256, Ben, Jason, and Matt had Charlene Deaver-Vasquez on the show. Charlene is the president of FISMAX LLC, and the segment was about risk models that use quantitative analysis and other mathematical models in order to predict risk. There's a very old topic in a way. Insurance companies have been doing that kind of stuff for years, but now they're starting to apply these kind of models and quant analysis to security. So that's sort of the coming storm. In the second segment, the business security news. On Enterprise Security Weekly 267, Adrian Larry and Tyler Shields had Tim Cathcart, who is a teacher of mathematics, cybersecurity, and computer science. Wow, they covered all the bases. And as a teacher at Knox County Schools in, I presume, Knoxville, Tennessee. I guess it could be somewhere else, but I think I saw that it was Bearden. And as I used to live there, I know something about that area. So hi, everybody in Knoxville. The show was about, teaching high school and how to teach high school tech students some of the perspectives that high school students had related to cybersecurity and other discussions about how do we attract people to this field and how do we get the best students into computer science and cybersecurity realm. And again, that's a topic that's been around ever since computer stuff started to come onto the table because it's hard. This is a difficult, challenging subject, so how do we get people to choose that? In the second segment, Stephen Turner, a senior security cloud solution architect at Microsoft, was on the show. They talked about a fun subject, that started with cyber buzzwords, which we all know, stuff like active AI enhanced and, that kind of stuff. And then they did go on into a popular buzzword of the day, zero trust, and talked about what zero trust actually looks like and what impact the federal government may have in their sort of adopting zero trust and jumping on the zero trust bandwagon. And so a pretty interesting and relevant segment there. In the third segment, the enterprise security news. On Security Weekly News, number 199, Fleming Shee joined us. Fleming is the CTO at Barracuda Networks. Has been on the show at least a couple, maybe once or maybe several times before. Fleming's always a fun guest, and we talked about issues about really malicious software like wiper software and things like that. That's not really designed for you to pay a ransom and recover, but it's really designed to bring you to a screeching halt and damage as much stuff as possible. And we talked about some of the things you might want to think about related to how long can your company be down, can you actually restore your backups and so forth. So fun, always fun to talk with Fleming, a very knowledgeable person. On Paul's Security Weekly, number 734, first up was Mark Bolts Robinson, as a manager of the ADRP team at Trellix. Mark was on to talk about the current state of Security Operations Center, so SOCs. Talked about some of the challenges in building SOCs. A lot of people are learning that it's not as easy as just installing some software and hitting play. What kind of stuff is popular, what stuff is successful, and so forth. A lot of fun to talk about SOCs. In the second segment, Haneen Salim, a managing partner at Novus Consulting Group, was on, and that conversation was around a very similar idea to what was on Enterprise Security Weekly this week, talking about secondary schools and how secondary schools are under attack more and more, and also how to attract new students into the field. I used to do some consulting on secondary schools in Colorado and looking at, they didn't really have the resources for this kind of stuff. They often had the equipment, but they didn't have the people. They went on and talked about how to protect schools in general and things that we need to be doing, going forward. And, of course, their third segment was the security news. The threat of the week for me is going to be data and information overload. I was reading this article that's attached about how security complexity could be weaponized against us, and it immediately made me start thinking about a job that I had a long time ago. I was a junior sysop type and at the university when I was an undergraduate, and I was told when I first reported to work in the computing center that every day I needed to review the logs and sign that I had reviewed them. And I was like, okay. And then they showed me this giant stack of thousands of pages of green bar paper. And if you don't know what green bar paper is, well, you're not as old as I am. But they had all these thousands of pages and had all these log entries from the night before. And I immediately said, are you serious? How the hell would I ever review all that if I spent the entire shift reviewing it instead of doing my actual job? And this older student who was sort of, I guess, my supervisor said, just sign it. You don't actually have to look at it. And I said, but what if something happened? And he looked at the giant stack of paper and immediately said, do you really think that would be helpful if something actually happened? And I guess he was right. I mean, it's really easy to overload yourself. And with modern tools, we get more information than ever out of our security systems. And, your analysts are getting bombarded with this. The first time I set up Snort, for a company, and I dumped the output into a file. I just turned it on and I left it running. I wanted to see what it would do. And when I came back the next day, the hard drive was full. It was just overwhelming. There were so many alerts. I mean, obviously it hadn't been tuned, and obviously Snort is a really cool and nice product, but I wasn't using it effectively. And it just, I was like, okay, this is not going to help me very much until I spend a bunch of time sorting it out. I mean, I do see it all the time. A SOC analyst has so many alerts on their screen that they're supposed to review, and they just kind of get numb to it. Like a lot of stuff we do, like school shootings and things like that, which, now are not even headline stories anymore. And you just sort of stop seeing it. So this article was about how attackers are now going to probably start, we all know they already are, but start injecting noise into the system and distractions, which will cause all these alerts, which would keep you from actually seeing what was going on. I mean, if I just wrote a little script that every little time, it caused a whole bunch of log entries to get dumped. Well, that alone might get everybody looking over there, but what about the fake ransomware attack or even a real ransomware attack that I run in order to distract you from what I'm actually doing? And I mean, that's an old trick, right? When you want to steal Thag's rocks, you start a fire next to Thag's cave and yell fire. And while Thag is running to see what the conflagration is burning, you steal the rocks. I mean, that's the oldest hacking thing in the book, right? Is keep them occupied while you do something else. It's a basis of magic. It's a basis of just about everything. And the same goes in modern cybersecurity. I mean, when I actually went and asked if I could write some code that would parse the logs before they were printed and save paper, I did start to see people attempting to generate events. And I saw stuff in the logs that looked like maybe they're just trying to cause a whole bunch of stuff to go by, and they probably could even run all the paper out of the printer if they worked at it a little bit. And I actually thought maybe some people were trying to do that. I mean, we would put like a massive quantity of paper in that line printer, but all of that could have really made my logging useless, even if I was finding it useful in the first place. In fact, one of the early log fail-safes that we used was to put an old printer on the system and dump commands to it so they couldn't, scrub the digital logs and they couldn't get to the paper in the locked room. But if they sent enough stuff to run the printer out of paper before they did anything else, well, that settles that. So it really seems that with all the complexity and all the participants that are going on and everything out there from nation states to 12-year-old kids in Johor Bahru to the St. Aloysius Girls Choir and Hacking Society, well, somebody is going to figure out how to trigger events intentionally and distract all kinds of people from the real events that are actually more subtle. I mean, a fake malware outbreak would probably get everybody running around flapping their arms pretty fast. So this may be the kind of information overload attack that we're going to start to see more and more, especially as nation states start to need to cover up the more subtle thing that they're actually trying to do, like, say, an exfiltration or creating false accounts in the system. And that basically means weaponizing the alert systems to distract everybody from the relatively subtle activity with a large outbreak of something that sets off every single blinking light on the Elastic server. I mean, not that any of that is news to you. You've seen it before. And like I said, people were trying to generate these log entries all the time to cover up what they were doing or call it to scroll off the monitor before somebody in the sysop actually noticed it, even back in the Stone Age of computing. I mean, can you say PDP-11 and DEC 10? So, of course, these tactics persist today because they do work. But with the sophisticated AI improved systems that we're using now, it may be actually a lot easier to light that fire and generate a bunch of smoke over the hill to get old Thag to run out and see what's going on. So it's definitely an interesting, I won't call it a development, but it's an interesting area to consider. And now, the news. So apparently, Elon Musk purchased Cisco outright on Friday morning and stated that he was hoping to have an all-electric version of the ASA available as soon as next year. He claimed that the new electric router would use Twinix cables instead of RJ45s and would likely be self-aware. The company will be rebranded and named Borstal Limited Manufacturing Concern, and their main line of products will be known as the Baby Huey Nut Bar. Musk declined any other questions on the matter, but said Steam firewalls are on the way out. Sorry, I couldn't resist. All right. Spring4shell is a new remote code execution vulnerability that was designated CVE 2022-22965. The problem, and this is now being compared to the Log4j problem of last year, the problem is in the Spring Core framework, which is an open source framework that is widely used, and it's built into the Apache Tomcat. So a very, very common platform on the old interweb. ExtraHop, who wrote this article, indicated that this vulnerability may be as severe as Log4shell. Spring Core is a mechanism which allows you to extract parameters from web requests and is often used in development and monitoring of web services. And so, it's a very handy thing. Their example of this is the extraction of email usernames and passwords parameters from a web request. And then basically what it does is it stores them in an object. So all the source code and the examples that they use to show this attack are in the link on the wiki. The vulnerability occurs because a special variable called a class, or its named class, is exposed in certain circumstances. So, for instance, if you're using regular Java objects, which are called POJOs for plain old Java object, and you have bound a request parameter to the object, if it doesn't have the @request body tag associated with it as an annotation, the class variable becomes exposed. And I know that sounded a little, if you don't really know all that stuff, it's probably a little convoluted, but the article has the grim details if you want to study up on it. The class variable has a reference, a pointer, I guess, to the object that contains the mapped HTTP parameters. So basically what this library does is it pulls those parameters and puts them in a Java object. And this class exposure means you have a pointer to that object. So if you have a pointer to the object, then you can access the object with the parameter values inside, which means that paths to other things can be followed, and this may allow an injection or other manipulation of the website. The article has an example where they were able to inject a web shell into an app running on Apache Tomcat. So Spring4shell has officially confirmed that this was patched as of 31 March. So check out their official blog. There's a link in that article for how to put this patch in place if you're running Apache Tomcat or other things that use Spring4shell. Apple pushed out two security updates on Thursday, or I'm sorry, a security update on Thursday, which fixes two zero-day vulnerabilities that were being exploited on iPhones, iPads, and Macs. Apple confirmed they believe the issues may have been actively exploited in the wild. One of the flaws in out-of-bounds write issue in the Intel graphics driver, which would allow an app to read kernel memory. That's never a good thing. Just the word kernel memory is a bad thing to hear in association with a vulnerability. The other one is an out-of-bounds read issue in the Apple AVD media decoder that allows for the execution of arbitrary code. And here it comes again, that has kernel-level privileges. Neither of those is a good thing to hear. So Macs that are running Monterey, iPhone 6s and later, iPad Pros, iPad Air 2s, and there's a whole list, iPad 5th Gen, iPad Mini 4, iPod Touch 7th Gen, all those things are impacted by these 0 days. So pretty much everything modern. Apple did not provide any information about the attacks in the wild, where they were done, or what exactly happened. But this is 5 0 days in Apple products already just this year. So keep those patches rolling. I saw there was another update to that today. There was a big patch yesterday, and then this morning there was already yet another update to this. So, definitely keep up with your patching on your Apple devices, or everything else for that matter. This week, a bug found in Honda and their luxury brand Acura was found, which affected the remote keyless entry function. Now, I remember on one of my old cars that the door lock didn't work very well with the key because, I don't know, it was something weird about it. So I would actually unsnap the top, because it was convertible, and reach in through there and unlock the door because it was a really small car. And then I kind of realized, well, there really wasn't much point to locking in the first place. Now, was there? It probably wouldn't have run if somebody tried to steal it, and there was nothing in it with any real value. So I was just like, all right, let's just skip this part. But in the modern age, my car not only knows who I am, where I am, and when I'm approaching it, and lights up and says, hello, Dave, but it can actually sense my mood and have a warm snack waiting when I get in. Yapan Rajesh and Blake Berry reported the flaw in the keyless entry system, since essentially anybody can access that radio signal, and it's not encrypted. In their demo, they were able to acquire complete and unlimited access to the locking, unlocking, window controls, opening the hatch, and other features of the vehicle. And since the commands are sent unencrypted, if the attacker intercepts them, well, they were able to record these commands and then play them back later. Yeah, and they were also able to start the engine if the car had remote engine starting, which is something some cars do have. They did confirm that the 2009 Acura TSX, the 2016 Accord, and others up through the 2020 Honda Civic LX were vulnerable to this type of attack. Honda said this type of flaw is nothing new, and they cannot confirm its existence, and they had no plans to update older car models. It did appear the attack only worked at close proximity. makes sense. Of course, a Tesla was stolen using this type of method back in 2020, but Honda said their cars could not be driven without the actual key fob nearby. So even if they intercepted various commands, they would not be able to actually drive away in the car, but they could, of course, continue to open your doors and your, the rear hatch or roll the windows down or whatever. The point of the article, though, is that there's a lot of convenience tech now with us and growing all the time. With cars, with other things, and that all may well have been developed without any kind of security idea in place. And the language from Honda on this sounds exactly like every other industry that said, well, Doug, you and your nerd friends, and I use the term friend lightly, and I use the S on the friends kind of lightly too, may be able to figure out how to hack the bank. But real people are out eating hot dogs and apple pie and enjoying the days. So why don't you just go back down to your little cubicle and be quiet like a good little programmer, and everything will be fine. That was really said to me, sort of. I kind of have the accent down. You know what you did. Apparently, March 31st is World Backup Day. It's news to me. That's the one day of the year when all the good little programmers pray to Ada Lovelace that they will get a PS5 sometime before, the final heat death of the universe. And sysadmins everywhere wear lederhosen to work, and there's this whole thing with a dancing snake and some cocaine, and there's the whole thing pretty much goes off the rails after that and turns into a disco party in 1977. I'm not sure exactly what the protocols are for World Backup Day, but it's starting to sound like a good time. But anyway, according to the Sophos tip, and this was their sort of meme, the only backup you will ever regret is the one you didn't make. Which sounds a lot like those posters they make you put up in your office at corporate, like at the bank. I think mine said something like, try, if only for a minute, to be a better worker. I took it down, and they made me put it back up, and they told me if I kept taking it down, they'd make me put up 2 of them, and they spent a lot of money on those things. Anyway, it made me want to grab the 3rd rail, but you weren't allowed to take them down or grab the 3rd rail. I love the smell of forced motivation in the morning. Anyway, they are right. You need backups, and you probably need backups of everything. Remember Fleming, if you watch the show on Tuesday talking about the wipers and how those things are targeting everything, and they are around and they are coming for you. According to the article, the 2021 survey showed that 57% of companies that were hit by ransomware were able to restore if they had backups. So that's, if nothing else, that's a reason. But I got news for you. If you don't back up your stuff, I don't care whether you're, one person, a small company, an enterprise, or a worldwide conglomerate, eventually you're going to get got if you don't have backups. I mean, even if it's just a hard drive failure or a cat barfs on your motherboard, you may lose a lot of stuff that you value if you don't have a way to back it up and restore it. And, worms and ransomware don't discriminate. They don't just target the people they're aimed at. They target everyone. Remember the Morris worm? It didn't just go after what they thought. It went everywhere. So if you're connected when something gets hit, or you just screw up and download that Star Trek ASCII porn file, it's the original series, not next gen. But I mean, if it's actually WannaCry instead of what you thought, you're going to need backups. So now might be a good time to go check on yours, and be sure and test that you can actually restore what you think you can restore. Because if you don't do that, it may not work. Rockwell Automation is a familiar name in the ICS world of sensors and programmable logic controllers, and recently 2 serious vulnerabilities were found in their PLC. Clarity Team 82 was the researcher that found the vulnerabilities, and they described them as having the potential to be Stuxnet-like, since they would allow attackers to run malicious code on a PLC without it being detected easily. So one of the vulnerabilities is remotely exploitable, and it had a severity of 10. Once they get into that remotely exploitable world, that's bad. And it's found in the control logics, compact logic, and guard logic control systems. This particular vulnerability basically allows a way to modify the bytecode of the system, which is the actual executables, without touching the source code. So that means if somebody's looking at the source code, it looks like it's legit, and they can verify it, but the bytecode, which is what's actually being run on the system, would be different from that. The 2 things are stored in different locations, which means that they are 2 separate files. So think like Cisco startup and Cisco running. The second vulnerability is in the Studio 5000 Logix Designer, which is a programming software tool that is used for the PLCs. This vulnerability allowed an attacker to alter the code as it's being compiled without anyone knowing that it was actually being modified as it was being converted into bytecode. That one only has a 7.7 severity, so it must not be remotely accessible. But Stuxnet was a similar attack because it executed modified bytecode even though the normal source code appeared to be still in place. CISA issued an alert on this matter on Thursday and strongly advised you, if you have any of these products, that you proceed to their mitigation measures and detection methods that they attach to their alert. So there's a link to that in the article, so you can get to all that if you're running those products. So, and finally, I couldn't resist this story, but Zlib is an old library, and it was literally one of the very first things I ever learned that I had to have in Linux, and I didn't know what it was, and I was trying to compile something way back when, like in the 90s, and it said the dependency was Zlib. And the very first compile I tried to do on a Linux distro, Zlib was a dependency, and I had to figure out A, how to get it, B, how to include it, and how to get it compiled in with what I was doing. It was really a start of an adventure with Linux for me. But Zlib's one of those quirky old sites that's been around forever, and they describe their product on their site as, quote, a massively spiffy yet delicately unobtrusive compression library, also free, not to mention unencumbered by patents, end quote. So, as you may guess, anything that needs compression, well, just about everything uses some kind of library, and a lot of it uses Zlib, even though that's a really old algorithm that is not maybe as good as some modern ones, but everybody knows what it is. Everybody says, oh, I use Zlib, it works. Their algorithm's called Deflate, so if you've ever used that, and their tool is called gzip, which you probably have used. It's starting to sound familiar, but all this is from 1996, mind you. But, getting developers to change their ways is kind of like trying to convince someone to switch religions or political parties or what kind of beer they like. And so it's still widely used. Well, this week, they finally patched a bug that was identified by Tavis Ormandy, who's a fairly famous bug hunter. And Tavis found this bug in 2018. So when he reported it back then, he was told by Zlib that it was 13 years old then and that it had already been patched. Now, that wasn't untrue except for the fact that the patch wasn't in use. What happened was that despite the fact that the patch was committed in 2018, it never actually got updated since the current lib that was in use was from 2017. So they actually patched it in the commit or in the file, but they didn't ever actually issue an update after 2017. So it is finally patched, apparently. Zlib 1.2.12 does have the update. And just because it's old doesn't mean it isn't really screwed up. I mean, look at me. But anyway, that's the wrap-up for the week of 27 March 2022. I'm Doug White. We'll see you next week with the Security Weekly News.